The Galactic Council chamber fell silent when Ambassador Keela of the Zenthri Collective rose to speak. Her crystalline form shimmered with barely contained agitation as she addressed the assembled representatives of 47 star systems. They had gathered to discuss the newest applicant for membership, a species that had only just achieved faster-than-light travel 3 cycles ago. A species from a world they called Earth, and who called themselves humans. The Zenthri had been the first to make contact, and what Keela had discovered there had shaken her to her very core. She began her testimony with a trembling voice that resonated through the translation matrices positioned throughout the Grand Chamber. The humans, she explained, came from a death world. Not the garden paradise that birthed the gentle Luminians, not the crystalline caverns that sheltered the philosophical Kartok, and certainly not the peaceful oceanic expanses that gave rise to her own people. Earth was a nightmare made manifest, a crucible of violence where every single organism was locked in an eternal struggle for survival. The planet's axis tilted wildly, creating seasons of brutal extremes. Tectonic plates shifted and ground against each other, spawning earthquakes that leveled cities and volcanic eruptions that choked the skies. The atmosphere itself rebelled with tornadoes, hurricanes, and lightning storms of such ferocity that they could obliterate entire forests in moments. And yet, somehow, impossibly, life thrived there. Not just survived, but flourished in ways that defied every principle the Council held dear. Keela's voice dropped to barely above a whisper as she described the fauna of Earth, and the representatives leaned forward in their seats, their various sensory organs straining to catch every word. There were creatures on that world, she said, that existed solely to kill and consume other creatures. They called them predators, a word that had no direct translation in most council languages because such things simply did not exist on civilized worlds. She projected holographic images into the center of the chamber, and gasps of horror rippled through the assembled delegates. Great cats with fangs as long as a Kartok's arm, reptiles whose jaws could crush starship hull plating, ocean dwellers so massive they could swallow a transport shuttle whole, insects that devoured their prey from the inside out, microorganisms invisible to the naked eye that could bring down the mightiest beast in days. Earth was an abattoir, a slaughterhouse planet where death lurked in every shadow, every leaf, every drop of water. But then Keela revealed the truth that had truly terrified her during her time on Earth, the revelation that had prompted this emergency session of the Council. Humans were not the prey species they had initially assumed. Despite their soft skin, their lack of natural armor, their absence of venomous fangs or tearing claws, humans were not victims of their world's violence. They were its architects. They were apex predators, perhaps the most efficient killers their planet had ever produced. She showed them footage from Earth's databases, historical records that the humans had shared with disturbing openness, almost with pride. Humans hunting in packs, using tools and strategy to bring down creatures 10 times their size. Humans domesticating the very wolves that had once stalked them, turning predators into companions. Humans developing weapons of increasing lethality, from sharpened stones to explosive devices that could level mountains, until they had finally created instruments capable of sterilizing their entire planet multiple times over. The council members stirred uneasily in their seats, mandibles clicking nervously, bioluminescent organs pulsing with anxiety, crystalline bodies chiming discordantly. Councillor Thresh of the Mechanical Concordat, whose species had evolved past biological imperatives millennia ago, asked the question that hung heavy in the recycled atmosphere of the chamber. What did this mean for their peaceful federation? Could such a species ever truly integrate into a society built on cooperation, mutual understanding, and the complete rejection of violence? Keela looked at each delegate in turn, her crystalline eyes reflecting their growing fear back at them. She had asked the humans the same question, she admitted, though phrased more diplomatically. She had inquired about their capacity for peace, their ability to move beyond their violent origins. And the human ambassador, a weathered female with scars marking her face and a quiet intensity in her eyes, had smiled at the question. It was not a cruel smile or a threatening one, but it carried within it something that Keela could not quite name at the time. Now, standing before the council, she understood what she had seen in that expression. It was the confidence of a predator that had nothing left to prove, the calm certainty of something that had already won every battle that mattered. The human had leaned forward and spoken words that Keela would never forget. Ambassador Sarah Chen had looked directly into Keela's crystalline eyes and said something that resonated in ways the Zenthari diplomat was still struggling to understand. She said that humans had not merely survived their world, they had conquered it so thoroughly that they had nearly destroyed it in the process. Then they had made a choice, a conscious decision to step back from the brink, to redirect their predatory instincts toward new frontiers rather than their own extinction. It was, Chen explained, the most difficult thing humanity had ever done, far harder than splitting the atom or reaching their moon or even achieving faster-than-light travel. Learning not to hunt each other, learning to see other humans as pack rather than prey, had taken tens of thousands of years and cost billions of lives. But they had done it, and that transformation, that conscious evolution from predator to protector, was humanity's greatest achievement. Keela replayed the recording for the council, and they watched in fascination as Ambassador Chen continued her explanation. Earth had forged humans in fire and blood, she said without apology or shame. Their ancestors had climbed to the top of the food chain not through superior strength or speed, but through sheer stubborn persistence and an ability to cooperate that bordered on the supernatural. Humans were persistence hunters, she explained, a concept so alien to the council that translation matrices struggled to convey its meaning. Her ancestors would simply follow their prey for days, sometimes weeks, never stopping, never giving up, until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. They outlasted everything. They outwalked, outran, and outthought every other predator on their planet until nothing remained to challenge them but themselves. And then, for thousands of years, they had turned that relentless nature inward, hunting each other with the same methodical persistence that had made them masters of their world. The recording continued, and Chen's voice took on a quality that several council members would later describe as almost hypnotic. She spoke of human history with unflinching honesty, holding nothing back. Wars that lasted generations, conflicts that consumed entire continents, genocides that stained their collective memory with shame so deep that humans still wept at the mention of them millennia later. She detailed weapons of increasing horror, from blades of bronze to bullets of lead to bombs that split atoms and burned entire cities to shadows and ash in single blinding moments. The council watched in muted horror as Chen projected images of human warfare across the centuries, the endless parade of violence that had characterized their species' climb to civilization. And yet, she said with quiet intensity, they had stopped. Not because they had lost the capacity for violence, but because they had finally, painfully, learned to direct it outward toward the challenges of the universe rather than inward toward each other. Ambassador Chen stood from her chair in the recording, her posture straight and proud, and addressed Keela with words that now echoed through the council chamber. She explained that humans understood predation in ways that no other species in the galaxy could truly comprehend because they had lived it, breathed it, been shaped by it down to their genetic code. Their eyes faced forward, positioned for tracking prey. Their teeth, despite thousands of years of soft foods and advanced dental care, still came to points designed for tearing meat. Their bodies produced adrenaline, flooding their systems with chemical rage in moments of danger, temporarily granting them strength and speed and pain resistance that defied their normal limitations. They were built to hunt, built to kill, built to persist until nothing remained standing before them. This was not weakness, Chen said, but strength. Because unlike species that had evolved in peace and knew only cooperation, humans understood violence intimately and had consciously chosen to reject it. The recording showed Chen walking to the window of the meeting chamber, gazing out at the Zenthari capital city with its graceful towers of living crystal, its gardens that flowed like frozen music through the urban landscape. She turned back to Keela and said something that sent chills through every delegate now watching in the council chamber. If your peaceful federation ever faces something that doesn't value cooperation, if you ever encounter a species that sees your kindness as weakness to be exploited, your gentleness as an invitation to conquest, then you will need humans. Because we understand predators. We are predators. And we know exactly how to deal with them. Not because we enjoy violence or long for the days of war, but because we remember what it took to survive our world, and we will never forget the lessons Earth taught us. We are not ashamed of what we are. We simply choose to be something more. The Council had deliberated for 7 solar cycles before reaching their decision regarding humanity's application for membership. The vote was narrow, carried by a margin of only 3 representatives, with many abstaining entirely from what they considered an impossible choice. They would grant provisional membership, they decided, but humanity would be monitored, assessed, and evaluated at every step. The humans accepted these terms without protest or indignation, demonstrating either remarkable patience or unsettling confidence. Ambassador Chen assured the Council that her people understood their concerns and would do everything in their power to prove themselves worthy of full membership. She returned to Earth to share the news, and the Galactic Council turned its attention to other matters, uncomfortable discussions about integration protocols and security measures that might contain this dangerous species if they proved too volatile for civilized space. Then the Krethik arrived, and everything changed. They came without warning, dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edges of Zenthari space with a fleet that blotted out the stars. They were unlike anything the Council had encountered in 8,000 years of peaceful expansion and cooperation. The Krethik were conquerors, pure and simple, a species that had evolved on a world even harsher than Earth, but unlike humans, they had never turned away from violence. They had perfected it, embraced it, built their entire civilization around the concept of taking what they wanted from whoever was too weak to stop them. Their first communication to the Zenthari was not a greeting or an introduction, but a demand for immediate and unconditional surrender. They gave the Council 48 hours to comply before they would begin systematic destruction of every colony world in Zenthari space. The Council convened an emergency session, but the discussion quickly devolved into panic and despair. The Luminians proposed negotiation, searching for common ground with the invaders. The Kartok suggested offering tribute, material wealth in exchange for peace. The mechanical Concordat calculated probability matrices and found no scenario in which the Council's combined defensive forces could repel an assault of this magnitude. They had spent 8,000 years building a civilization dedicated to art, philosophy, scientific advancement, and peaceful coexistence. They had weapons, certainly, defense forces sufficient to discourage pirates and resolve minor territorial disputes, but nothing that could stand against a species bred for warfare. Councillor Thresh's calculations showed that the Krethik could sterilize every Council world within 2 standard years, and there was absolutely nothing the Peaceful Federation could do to stop them. Ambassador Keela watched the panic spread through the chamber, saw representatives of species far older and more advanced than her own reduced to terrified creatures contemplating the extinction of everything they had built over millennia. And in that moment, she remembered Sarah Chen's words, spoken with such quiet certainty in that meeting chamber overlooking the crystal gardens of her homeworld. She remembered the human ambassador standing at that window, explaining that humans understood predators because they were predators, and they knew exactly how to deal with them. Keela activated her communication implant and sent an emergency transmission to the human embassy, marking it with priority codes that indicated existential threat. The response came back in less than 3 minutes, faster than should have been possible. Ambassador Chen's voice, steady and calm despite the nature of the crisis, filled Keela's auditory receptors with 2 simple words that somehow carried both promise and warning. "We're coming." The human ambassador provided no elaboration, no explanation of how humanity intended to help or what resources they would bring to bear against this threat. She simply stated that Earth was mobilizing and human ships would arrive in Zenthari space within 72 hours. The transmission ended, leaving Keela to stand before the panicking Council with information that provided no concrete details, no tactical assessments, no strategic plans. She had only a promise from a predator species, a guarantee of assistance from creatures whose capacity for violence had terrified the Council into nearly denying their membership application. She conveyed the message to the assembled delegates, and watched as fear mixed with desperate hope on their various faces and forms. What else could they do? The Krethik were coming, their fleet advancing through Zentari space like a plague, destroying automated monitoring stations and claiming territory with the casual efficiency of a species that had perfected conquest across countless worlds. The Council's deadline was approaching, and humanity was their only chance. 71 hours later, human ships emerged from faster-than-light travel at the designated coordinates, and the Council representatives who witnessed their arrival would carry the memory until the ends of their lives, sharing it with younger generations as both warning and wonder. The human fleet numbered 347 vessels, materializing in perfect formation at the edge of Zentari space with a precision that suggested either remarkable coordination or extensive military drilling. Neither assessment was comforting to the Council observers monitoring the arrival. These were not the exploratory vessels that humanity had previously sent through Council space, those relatively modest craft with their curious crews and their endless questions about Council culture and history. These were warships, purpose-built instruments of destruction that made no pretense of being anything else. They were angular where Council vessels were curved, armored where Council ships were elegant, bristling with weapons arrays that Council analysts struggled to categorize using their existing tactical databases. The humans had clearly spent their brief time in Council space studying every scrap of military technology they could access, and then they had improved upon it with the focused intensity of a species that understood warfare at a fundamental level. Ambassador Chen broadcast on open channels, her transmission designed to reach both the Council and the Krethik simultaneously. Her words were measured, professional, and carried an undercurrent of something that the Council members had never heard in human speech before, something ancient and cold that predated civilization itself. She introduced herself and explained that humanity had come at the Council's request to assist in negotiations with the Krethik. The choice of words was deliberate, almost diplomatic, but every being listening understood the subtext. Humans had not come to negotiate. They had come to fight, and they wanted the Krethik to know it. The Krethik commander responded with contempt, demanding to know what possible relevance this pathetic assemblage of primitive vessels could have in a conflict between true warriors. The Krethik had conquered 12 star systems. They had subjugated 43 species. They were the apex predators of their region of space, and nothing could stand against them. Ambassador Chen's response would be studied in military academies for generations afterward, analyzed for its psychological precision and its absolutely perfect calibration of threat and promise. She explained that humans were willing to facilitate a peaceful resolution to this conflict, but peaceful did not mean unconditional. The Krethik would withdraw from Zentari space immediately, return all captured territory, pay reparations for damages incurred, and submit to Council observation to ensure compliance with galactic law regarding unprovoked aggression. In return, humanity would guarantee their safe passage out of Council space and advocate for diplomatic relations once appropriate restitution had been made. The Krethik commander's response was predictable, a stream of threats and insults that the translation matrices struggled to render in polite terms. He called humans prey pretending to be predators, weaklings hiding behind borrowed technology, cowards who would scatter at the first exchange of fire. He promised to add Earth to his list of conquered worlds, to enslave humanity just as he had enslaved the other species foolish enough to resist Krethik expansion. The Council held its collective breath, waiting for Ambassador Chen's response, expecting anger or defensive posturing or perhaps a retreat from her bold ultimatum. Instead, they heard something far more disturbing. Chen laughed. It was not a nervous laugh or a mocking one, but rather the sort of laugh that might escape from someone who had just heard a child threaten to fight a hurricane. When she spoke again, her voice had changed entirely, stripped of diplomatic pretense to reveal something raw and honest beneath. She thanked the Krethik commander for making this simple, for removing any ambiguity about his intentions or any possibility of misunderstanding that might complicate what came next. Then she said words that froze every Council member in their seats. The commander had chosen violence, she explained, and violence was what he would receive. Not because humans wanted it or enjoyed it, but because they were exceptionally good at it, and they had learned long ago that the only language predators truly understood was overwhelming force delivered with absolute conviction. The human fleet moved forward in perfect synchronization, accelerating toward the Krethik positions with a speed that suggested either recklessness or complete confidence in their abilities. The Krethik opened fire first, their massive weapons arrays lighting up space with destructive energy that should have vaporized the approaching human vessels. But the human ships flowed around the incoming fire like water around stones, their evasive maneuvers so precise and coordinated that they seemed almost choreographed. They closed the distance at impossible speeds, and then they returned fire. The Council's sensors registered energy signatures they had never encountered before, weapon systems that bent physics in ways their scientists insisted should not be possible. The humans had spent 3 cycles studying Council technology and the brief recordings captured of Krethik weapon systems, and they had built something new, something terrible, something that married human ingenuity with the harsh lessons their species had learned during thousands of years of warfare. The battle lasted 17 minutes. When it ended, the Krethik fleet had been reduced to scattered debris and fleeing survivors broadcasting surrender across all frequencies. The human ships had not emerged unscathed, 43 vessels showed significant damage, and 7 had been destroyed completely, their crews lost in a violent exchange. But they had achieved something the Council had considered impossible. They had broken a predator species, demonstrated such overwhelming superiority that the Krethik commander himself broadcasted an unconditional surrender, his voice trembling with an emotion that translation matrices identified as primal fear. The humans had not just defeated them. They had dominated them so completely, so efficiently, that the Krethik would carry the memory of this encounter back to their home worlds as a warning. There were older predators in the galaxy, species that had perfected violence long before the Krethik had left their cradle world, and those predators were called humans. Ambassador Chen addressed the Council in the aftermath, her face visible on holographic displays throughout the chamber. She looked tired, the weight of those 7 destroyed ships and their lost crews visible in the lines around her eyes, the set of her jaw. She explained that humanity took no pleasure in what had just occurred, that every life lost on both sides represented a failure of civilization, a regression to the brutal calculus their ancestors had spent millennia trying to transcend. But she also made clear that humans would do it again if necessary, would meet violence with violence whenever the safety of innocent beings required it. This was not a threat, she insisted, but simply a statement of fact. Earth had bred them to survive against impossible odds, to persist when any reasonable species would surrender, to fight with a ferocity that bordered on madness when protecting what they valued. The Council had been concerned about accepting predators into their peaceful federation, and those concerns had been valid. But perhaps they should also consider what it meant to have predators on their side. The voting that followed was unanimous. The Council granted humanity full membership with all rights and privileges, along with something unprecedented in 8,000 years of galactic history. They established the human fleet as the primary defensive force for Council space, recognizing that some tasks required capabilities that peaceful species had deliberately evolved away from. Humans would serve as protectors, watchers on the walls of civilization, maintaining the capacity for violence so that others would not have to. It was a burden, Ambassador Chen acknowledged, but one her species was uniquely suited to bear. They understood the cost of violence, the weight of necessary destruction, better than any species in the galaxy. They would carry that weight so that others could continue pursuing art and philosophy and all the peaceful endeavors that made civilization worth protecting. In the cycles that followed, humanity integrated into Council space in ways no one had predicted. Human engineers studied alongside Kartok philosophers, learning to apply technological advancement with wisdom and restraint. Human artists collaborated with Lemnian composers, creating works that merged predatory intensity with transcendent beauty. Human scientists worked in Council laboratories, bringing a perspective shaped by survival rather than pure curiosity, asking different questions and finding different answers. They were still predators, still carried the scars and instincts of their violent world, but they chose to be something more. They chose to protect rather than prey upon, to build rather than destroy, to use their terrible capabilities in service of peace rather than conquest. And when the next threat emerged, as threats inevitably do in a galaxy full of species following their own evolutionary paths, humanity stood ready. They stood at the border of known space, watching for dangers that peaceful beings preferred not to imagine, maintaining skills that civilized species had long ago abandoned. Earth had bred predators, not prey, and the galaxy was learning that this was not a curse but a gift. Because when darkness came seeking to devour the light, when violence threatened the peaceful, when predators emerged from unexplored regions of space with conquest in their hearts, there would be humans standing in their path. Not because they loved violence or longed for the old days of war, but because they remembered what their planet had taught them, because they understood in their bones what it meant to be apex predators in a universe that was far more dangerous than most species wanted to believe. They were humanity, children of Earth, inheritors of a legacy written in blood and fire and endless persistence. They had conquered their world, learned to conquer themselves, and now they stood ready to face whatever the galaxy could throw at them. Not as victims. Not as prey. But as what Earth had always intended them to be, predators with principles, hunters with honor, warriors who had finally learned what to protect and what was worth fighting for. This was humanity's place in the cosmos, earned not through superiority but through the hard lessons of 10,000 generations, through the conscious choice to be better than their nature demanded while never forgetting what that nature made possible. Earth breeds predators, not prey. And the galaxy was safer for it.